couple minutes. He went through the data science track with the TU Eindhoven for the first year and KTH Stockholm for the second year. Currently, he is doing his thesis and also working at a startup company as a data scientist, and the company is called Normative. But also many of you know him as one of the startup organizers, owners of the Spotlight, which I like very much. And his overall interest is in environment and social sustainability. And the thing he's going to be talking about is about exactly that, sustainability, how to measure it, how it impacts the environment, and how to regulate it. So please, Guillermo, the floor is yours.
Just a second, I'll start sharing my screen. Can you all see my presentation?
I can see it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So today I'm going to be talking about measuring sustainability. And yeah, just one side note, please stop or interrupt me at any point if you want for any question or something, because I cannot see the people now. So yeah. So yeah, measuring sustainability. It's actually a surprisingly deep topic, or at least it was for me. I got to learn about it when I joined Normative, as Davor said, which is a company working on sustainability reporting, helping small companies and bigger ones like try to figure out what their impact in sustainability is. And yeah, actually, I found it so interesting. Like even on the first speech I got from one HR representative from the company, that I really decided to join and try to help them in their mission. And I will try to bring that enthusiasm to you at least a little bit and show you like what are the challenges and everything that is surrounding this term. So let's start with sustainability. The thing is, sustainability is a really loaded term. It gets used and thrown around like a lot in different environments and different things. And most people associate it with the environment, like things like greenhouse emissions or the ozone layer or things like that. But it's actually quite a broad term. I like this definition in which it's said that sustainability means, or being sustainable means being able to achieve your goals, to get your needs met using the resources you need, but in a way that ensures that the future generations and future people and future, even your future self, will still be able to do so. What does that mean? Like, I mean, this is really general and looks good for society in general, but what does that mean exactly for companies? Well, for companies, they usually have, they think in terms of short term, I mean, relatively short term, and they do this by doing their financial reporting. So they look, okay, are we gonna be able to survive the next 5 years? Do we have enough income? Are we gonna go broke or not? Or these kind of things. But they actually can try to think long term as well. Like, will the company will still be here like in 100 years or not? Will our business model still be viable? Will be able to still make or provide business value to people while surviving and while providing employment to people? And to try to wrap your head around exactly which things you need to look at to try to plan for that far ahead into the future, there's usually 3 things that need to be taken into account, which are the environmental sustainability. So this is the most common one, like, are you using too many resources? Are you destroying the environment? Are you polluting? Those kind of things. But there's also social, which more or less rely on how are your employees in the company? Are you treating them well? Do you have, are you overworking them in such a way that you won't have employees anymore at some point? Or then even governance, which is more, how is the company run? Is it organized structurally, properly? Is the board diverse? How are the decisions being taken? Is there any structure in place so that sustainable decisions are taken more than others? And it is difficult to wrap your head around these things and decide a way to go forward. So it might be my background as a bias, but I think that in order to know where to head, you first have to really be able to measure exactly where you are. So you can plan ahead, set goals for yourself, and decide exactly what to change. And it's not only me that thinks about that. There's also state actors, such as the European Union or even, for example, the state of Sweden. There's venture capital firms and there's stock indexes that are also worried about that. For example, venture capital funds, they want to make investments and they want to get a return on them, but probably they also want to make investments that are sustainable, or at least some of them, because they want to be able to keep doing this. They want to be able to say that they're being good for the environment, that they're being sustainable. And yeah, they really want to know exactly which investments to do and which not based on certain criteria. So they really need to measure. And so much so that, for example, the European Union has a law that mandates that every company above 500 employees must do sustainability reporting. They must actually have to take it into account. And I also mentioned Sweden because, for example, here they are even more strict. It's companies of 250 employees that have to do it every year. So let's look at exactly which kind of things go into a sustainable report. From the social and governance side, we have some metrics that are more common or sound more sound, or people can kind of get an idea exactly how they could be measured. Although some of them might be a bit debatable, or sometimes they're a bit open, and you don't know exactly what you're measuring or things like that. But they're pretty clear. You know exactly. They're finite in a way. You know exactly which things to measure and what is good and what is and how to compare them. But when we go to environmental impact, there's so many things to take a look at. Like I don't even know what half of these even mean, and it's just really difficult. Is it better to pollute more, put more CO2 into the atmosphere than use more water? The answer is like most of the time we don't know. There's scientific studies about those topics, but still the trade-offs are not clear. And in an effort to actually try to wrap around these things and to do some standardized way of reporting, because in the end, we want to measure which companies are doing better, which companies are doing worse, so all of us can move in the same direction. Then these kind of environmental impacts have been divided into 3 scopes that are in scope 1, there's the direct impacts, which are if your company owns a factory, they are emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere directly. It's their factory. On cattle, the same. Or if they drive around in their own cars, they are actually polluting directly the environment. And comes 2, which is the simplest one, which is just if they actually get electricity from another company. So the other company is actually polluting the environment to generate that electricity, but it's just one step ahead. And so it's called like indirect emissions. But then there's the scope 3, which usually is not even taken into account. Like most people think of the environmental impact of a company just of those 2 things. But actually, this one compromises the whole supply chain of the company. So for example, from where the materials are sourced, how the things are transported, where they are sold, but actually even further than where the company is involved. So actually, how are consumers using the product? Are they being efficient with them? And how do they dispose of them? It might seem a bit crazy that a company that, for example, just designs some toaster can have to measure like maybe where people are going to throw it away or something. But actually, I think it makes sense because the companies can have an impact in those decisions. They can have procedures to take back old products. They can make them more repairable. They can maybe source the materials in different places. There's so much they can do. And then even if you want to measure all of these things, you have to think of impact factors, which are exactly a really narrow category of things. What are the impacts? Here, these ones don't take into account the numbers because I made them up, because it's actually really hard to know exactly what goes into each product. But ideally, we would be able to go to every single producer, like at the lowest level of the supply chains, and measure exactly what they do. So for example, if we go to a quinoa farmer in Bolivia, you might actually measure, okay, they're doing things in this way, they're getting the water from here, they have this much sun in their soil or something, and then you might actually be able to measure all these things. But it just gets impossible. Like when you have thousands of suppliers that then themselves have suppliers and themselves have suppliers and so on, it gets impossible. But the key thing here is that every economic activity that a company has an impact. And that's a fact. Like if you are spending money in getting something, you're definitely having an impact somewhere. And that helps us a bit in organizing this kind of thing. Because we can say, like, okay, we are not going to measure all the quinoa farmers in Bolivia independently, but maybe we know how much like all grain products in Bolivia are contributing to climate change. Those kind of studies are made, like, oh, transport worldwide is responsible for this many CO2 emissions. And then we can say, okay, we will group at that level. So if your company is using transportation, we will just assume that it's okay, it's using more or less the average. The deeper we can get, the better, of course, but there's also a trade-off because it will be more labor intensive. And that's actually how it's being done a bit right now, because most companies, when they have to do sustainability reporting, they actually hire consultants that will just look at all the activities of the company and try to guesstimate exactly how much impact they have had. But what I really like about this company that I joined is that they are trying to actually automatize this, to bring technology here, to choose the right levels at which we can aggregate data and try to come up with more standardized ways of measuring this and more standardized ways of grouping the products. But this just scratches the surface. There's so much more to be talked about here. So for example, underestimation or underreporting. So many companies will have in their interest to not report so many things because as it is actually difficult to measure, they can just say, oh, we didn't know, we did our best, or these kind of things. And yeah, if any of you stick around here, it would be really nice to talk about all these things. If you have any ideas of how exactly things can be done better, or if you have any crazy ideas like, yeah, this could be measured in this way or something, I'm all ears. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. It was amazing. I like it very much. We will now see if we have some questions. I think we have one so far from Paul. Do you want to read it out loud, Paul, or do you want me to read it?
I can read it. So I'm working in process mining on a daily basis. And here we aggregate like big chunks of data. And also these chunks of data come at its own cost, right? Because all this measuring also is kind of polluting the whole environment. So I was wondering, how do you think about all the people trying to measure different things and thereby, causing their own pollution instead?
You mean causing pollution by trying to measure? Like measuring itself causes pollution?
Yes, exactly.
Oof. Yeah, that's quite a big deal. So meta, I guess. I mean, I can tell you, like for example, at this company, we're trying to measure ourselves how much we are polluting in a way while trying to make other companies pollute less. And I think in general, the payoff is good because if you're actually measuring something, even if it takes some effort, you're probably the savings are going to be better. Of course, if you take my example from before and just go to every farmer everywhere and try to measure them accurately, maybe you're spending way more than actually payback is there. So, but I think there's a middle ground there that is actually good to reach.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but actually I have a question because you mentioned you have all these different environmental impacts. So transport, maybe waste management, green ICT, energy, and then the supply chain, which I haven't thought about it before. It could be actually one of the categories. Is there something like that you specialize in? Do you choose one of these, or do you have to have like a knowledge of all these different types when you work at a company?
At this company, actually, I mean, we are really few people. We are like 15 right now, I think. So we pretty much all have to work with everything. And my job right now is not totally with figuring out these impacts and everything. Actually, it's more with handling the data and making sure that we can get big companies that have a lot of things and trying to give them their best accurate estimation, trying to see what error we have in our own calculations, those sort of things. So actually, I don't have the I don't have a really deep knowledge on the specifics of the topic. But I don't need to either. And that's because there's some people at the company that are actually looking at all the environment reports and scientific studies that are published and try to gather all the information and extract it from there and store it within the company in a structured way so we can use it.
I see. Thank you. We have another question from Ashish. He raised a hand. He wants to ask it in person.
Hey, just wanted to ask, like, can you tell a little bit on the policy side, like how do you submit those reports, or who are the players in this area? Like you mentioned that usually companies hire consultants. So is it basically self-examination, or is there a government body who checks all those reports? So how's the policy side, the government side of doing things?
I'm not 100% sure on this, but as far as I know, there's the big four basically consultancies are the ones doing the most work here, and they actually, if you do reporting in your own terms, like on your own, like totally self-reported or something without consulting anyone, then usually you need to get one of these four companies to actually come and validate that your emissions have been calculated correctly. And then it depends a little bit. Like I know that for European Union, still not too strict, but they're working on it. But that's the thing with this topic. It's so open and there's so many different aspects to measure. And it's not even clear exactly, like even if they say, okay, you have to report your CO2 emissions, like what does that even mean? Like, there's so many things to look at. So I don't think they are being properly checked yet. And that's why I was mentioning underreporting as one of the big problems there.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if there are not many consultants doing it and only big four are doing it, and they are super expensive. I mean, not every company can hire big four. Yeah. So yeah,
exactly. That's the thing I really liked about these guys that I joined. Like they said, yeah, like right now this is the only option. Like you go with really expensive consultants, and we're trying to little by little automate it and everything. And actually, it's really funny that their initial idea was to go for the consumer market, to actually this kind of thing. I think we've all thought about it at some point. Like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I knew like exactly what is the impact of all these products that I'm seeing at the supermarket, so I can choose like the one with the least impact or something like that. And that was their dream too. But as it turns out, it's really complex to actually differentiate between products. Because, for example, as I said, you cannot measure all the farmers in Bolivia, probably not even in like in many countries. So in the end, you end up with kind of the same impact for all of them anyway. So it's really difficult to know exactly which choices are better in general. And then they decided, like, yeah, actually companies do have a use case for this because they are bigger. And in the end, even if we are grouping things, averages of many random variables tend to be quite precise, actually. So if you manage to be able to put an amount to every single euro spent by a company, then maybe we can actually find a direction for them to move, to spend this.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm checking out. There's no more questions. So if that's it, thank you very much, Guillermo. It was very interesting. And we will move to the next presenter. Our next presenter is Jan-Jaap de Groot. He is a software engineer, started in Enschede, and was interested how users make user software and how apps are actually made. So he joined EIT Digital, first year in Paris and second year in Stockholm as a HCID track. And last month he moved to Utrecht, where he works as a full-time entrepreneur and focuses on apps and specifically accessibility. So the team is going to be connect with that about apps, accessibility, users, smartphone interactions. So Jan-Jaap, the floor is yours.
All right, I think it's working. Is it? Can see my screen?
Yes, I can see. And other people are saying they can see, so it's good.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so my talk is about apps and accessibility, and mainly about how to comply with the European Accessibility Act. This is a new directive. I guess it's especially interesting for us as European students to see how this impacts apps, but also websites and also other digital things. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about accessibility a little bit, like what is it, then about the act, then about compliance, then I will tell a little bit about screen readers, then about voice control, switch access, and then conclusion. So starting out with accessibility. What is it? Well, you can describe it as the ability to access, not only with, for example, people in wheelchair, that you can access a building, but it's also about digital products or apps that everyone, regardless of any impairment they might have, are able to use the software or product. In Europe, there are around 445 million citizens. It's quite hard to find these numbers on disabilities, but I guess this is kind of an indication. Most common is actually hearing loss. It's around 34 million, but different gradations. So some people are deaf. Some other people might still be able to hear with hearing aids. Then dyslexia. This also impacts apps. For example, apps that use really difficult words, might be hard for someone to read. Then visual impairment, 24 million. Used in a wheelchair. This also depends what kind of reason someone is in a wheelchair. For example, maybe they lost their legs, then they're still able to use their hands, but some other people might have lost other body parts, which may be harder to use apps. Then autism, 3 million, might also be harder to focus. Blind people is 3 million. This is one of the hardest groups for accessibility, because if you're completely blind and you want to use an interface, you have to use a different way of interaction. Lastly, deaf, it's around 750,000 citizens. So this is also difficult, for example, with videos. If there's no closed captioning available, they won't really know what's happening. Then, to improve this around the whole Europe, the European Accessibility Act was proposed a couple years ago. Right now it has been accepted, and actually it's rolling out right now. And the goal of this act is to improve the internal market for accessible products and services. So not just products, but also services. And they made functional requirements for 10 products and services. So you can see them on the screen. It's computer operating systems, ATMs, ticketing and check-in machines, telephones and smartphones, and I guess you can read the rest of them. So it's a lot of different products and services, and they did a lot of surveys in different countries, and they made this list of 10 groups that are the most problematic and also the most important. For example, if you're traveling, air, bus, or rail, you want to be able to use ATMs to actually get a ticket on your own. So it's all about independence, that someone with a disability is able to use these products and services without any help. If you want, you can read the full directive. There's a link in the presentation. Then the timeline. So already enforced right now is new public sector websites and apps. This was is enforced from 23 September 2019. So it's a little bit more than half a year ago. Then this year, also on the same date, it will be enforced for existing and new public sector websites. So all old public sector websites that already exist also need to be made accessible. And this might be problematic because there are probably hundreds or thousands, or how many websites per city, and then per government agency, and then per country. So it's going to be a lot of websites that need to be made accessible. And then what's interesting for this talk, and also for me as an app developer, is that next year it's going to be enforced for existing and new mobile apps. So new apps already need to be made accessible, but now also the existing apps need to be made accessible. So how can you do this? How can you comply to this act? The directive, it's kind of vague actually. It tells you what needs to be accessible, but it does not impose technical solutions how you can exactly achieve this. So there's a list of common accessibility requirements that need to be implemented, but there's not a checklist, or it's kind of hard actually to know if your app is accessible. I guess it's right now it's more about trying to make it as accessible as possible, because there's no clear technical solution telling you, well, you need to implement this kind of checklist and then your app is accessible. But these are some of the requirements. For example, you need to provide communication and orientation via more than one sensory channel. So actually, it's kind of hard to read all these legal texts, but in this case, it means, for example, normally you use touch to interact with the smartphone, and now you can interact with your smartphone by voice. That's a different sensory channel. So B, provide for alternatives to speech for communication and orientation. For example, someone that is disabled and is not able to speak, you need to provide an alternative. So maybe you can use a keyboard instead of speech, or you can use maybe text-to-speech for communication. C, provide for flexible magnification and contrast. So this is already built in most smartphones. You can magnify, you can adjust the contrast ratio, but it's not always possible in the apps themselves. So this is also something that needs to be implemented. D, provide for an alternative color to convey information. This is when you have, for example, an agree and disagree button. Sometimes it can't be clear which one is which if there's no text on them. For example, if you have a green button and red button, if someone is colorblind or blind, then they won't know which one is the agree button, which one is the disagree button. So you need to convey it in a different way, for example, by adding text as well as color. Then E, provide for flexible ways to separate and control foreground from background, including for reducing background noise and improve clarity. This is also kind of vague again. I guess it means you need to be able to provide for the user to use different color schemes in your app. So, for example, visually impaired people, they often like having yellow background with black text. It's the best readability for them. Part 2 of the requirements, F, this one is kind of easy, provide for user control volume, but still, some apps you can't control the volume. So now you need to be able to actually control the volume yourself. G, provide for sequential control and alternatives to fine motor control. For example, if you have some kind of slider on the screen, it can be hard if someone has like a shaky hand or something to adjust this. So you need to provide alternatives. I'm not exactly sure how to do this in an app. But this, again, this is kind of the hard thing about these guidelines. They are guidelines and they provide some requirements, but they don't say how to do it. H, provide for modes of operation with limited reach and strength. This is one I will show a video of later in this presentation. For example, voice control, you can use your voice to operate your device. So by implementing voice control, you comply to H. Then I, provide avoidance of triggering photosensitive seizures. I guess this is more about maybe games or other apps or maybe annoying ads. You need to avoid triggering seizures. So I guess this is something you already didn't want to do, but now it's a requirement. Then something about principles. You can also find them about the V3C with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And then in this European Accessibility Act, they kind of build on top of the VCAG from the World Wide Web Consortium. So perceivable, it means provide multiple ways to perceive presented information. So you need to provide different ways. For example, you can access the content on the screen by reading with your eyes, but if you're blind, you can use text to voice so they can hear the content. Operable, you need to present interaction which the user can perform. So if someone is unable to use their hands, they are not able to touch the screen, so you need to provide an alternative way. For example, voice control again, they can use voice. Understandable, information and operation of a user interface must be understandable. I guess this is something you always want to do, but you need to make sure your app is easy to use, I guess. Robust, content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliable. reliably. All right. So this means, I guess, your app shouldn't crash. It should function as expected. If you press a button, something should happen. Your field should give some feedback. Yeah, so those are the sort of 4 principles you can implement in apps, but also on websites. Then something about impairment. So what kind of impairments do actually affect app usage? So you have visual impairment. This means a user probably uses a screen reader, or they want to use dynamic font size, so they use a larger font size, or they use or need to have different contrast ratios. Then hearing impairment. What you need is to have, for example, speech to text, so they can read the content instead, and also closed captioning on video, so they can read what is being said. Then for mobility impairment, you can have voice control, to use voice to control your device. Another option is to use switch access. Those are external devices, buttons to control your phone. Then for learning disability, you can use text-to-speech, because sometimes people are unable to read content, but if they can hear the content, they can understand it. And down at the bottom, you can find some accessibility help pages from Apple and Android about iOS and Android. So now some examples. I guess this is the most interesting part. It's about screen reader. So what is a screen reader? It reads what is shown on the screen. And you can use special gestures to navigate the interface. On Android, there's a built-in screen reader. It's called TalkBack. And on iOS, there's a built-in screen reader named VoiceOver. In this video, I'm showing a demo on iOS. Also, what's interesting is that most visually impaired people, which is the group which uses screen readers, most of them use iOS. So I'm going to give a demo on iOS. So you can turn it on your device.
VoiceOver on. VoiceOver speaks item. Bullet tap 1. Bullet double tap to activate the selected item. Bullets like 3 fingers to scroll. Bullet to go home. Slide 1 finger up from the bottom edge and bullet to use the app switcher.
So now I'm swiping with 1 finger to go to the next item. And there are a lot of different gestures to go through this interface. You should imagine that you can't see what's on the screen. You need to navigate purely by what you hear.
Slide up, bullet to VoiceOver practice button.
So this is a practice of some of the gestures that are available to navigate.
VoiceOver practice heading. Practice touch. Speak item.
So if you touch on the screen, it will speak the item which you touch. Oh, now it's going to a different slide. Let's see.
VoiceOver practice button. VoiceOver practice heading.
Waiting for the
Practice
second
touch.
item.
Speak item. Touch. One finger swipe.
All right, so 1 finger swipe up. If there's a rotor item, it's a special screen reader item, you can go to the next item.
Preview 1 finger.
Then if you swipe down, this is not working with the brakes. So let's skip again. I'm just going to play this video.
Speak item. Touch. One finger swipe up. Preview 1 finger swipe down. 1 finger swipe right. Move to next item. 1 finger swipe left. Move to 2 finger scrub. Escape. 3 finger double tap. Toggle mute. 2 finger double tap. Magic tap. 1 finger swipe left. Move to done button. VoiceOver practice button. Accessibility features help you customize your iPhone for your notifications. Sounds and haptic. Do not screen touch. General button. Control this accessibility. Accessibility features help vision. VoiceOver on. VoiceOver off.
Yeah, so I try to show the different gestures you have. But if you want to try it, I guess the best is, especially on iPhone, you can do the tutorial. On Android, there's no tutorial to follow, but you can still play around with the gestures. So you have different gestures to navigate. The basics are you can swipe right to go to the next item, swipe left to go to the previous item. You double tap to activate the item. Then you have some other special gestures, like drawing a Z with 2 fingers on 2 screens on the screen to navigate to the previous screen. You can also close pop-ups that way. But the problem is that most apps don't support screen readers, because you need to provide accessibility features in your app. So most apps don't work well with screen readers, but if you follow the accessibility guidelines from Apple for iOS or from Google for Android, then screen reader user will actually be able to use your app. Then the second example is voice control. This is also a demo on iOS. On Android, it's called voice access. It works in the same way. You control an app with your voice. A grid appears on the screen, so you have different numbers on the screen, and you can speak commands to execute actions. For example, you can say tap 1, it will tap the number 1 on the screen, and you can scroll down, scroll up, and there are actually more than 100 commands you can use. So this video, you can see in the top of the video, you will see what I'm saying. Let's see if it loads. There we go. So I'm turning on voice control. Right now it's only available in English, so if it's kind of hard for people who are, for example, Dutch, or if you're French and disabled. Most people don't speak English if they have a disability. So right now it's only really able to use this for people who speak English. So in the top, you can say, for example, I say tab 6. Then I say go back, it goes to the previous page. Then I can say tab 9, it taps element with number 9. I say scroll down, the screen scrolls down. Then I tap 13. I say tap 1, so I go back to the previous screen. I believe I'm trying to go up. So if you say go up, it doesn't work. You need to say scroll up. And now I'm going to turn it off again. I just say 2. It will give you, it will tap on the screen. So this way, if you're, for example, in a wheelchair and you're not able to use your hands, but you are able to use your voice, then you can use voice control to control apps. Then the third demo is switch access. So this is mainly intended for people, again, who are in wheelchairs, but this time people with more severe handicaps. So for example, if they're only able to use one finger of their hand, or only able to use their elbow, for example, they can use one button to control your device. So there's different kind of switches. Basically, those are buttons, like a fire extinguish button, like a big red button. You also have internal switches on iOS. These are the screen and the camera, so you can also use your head to turn left to go to the previous item and right to select an item. This is something that's not possible on Android. Again, only iOS. External switches, yeah, usually physical buttons, but they can be any shape as long as you can execute an action on them. Yeah, you can navigate the whole interface by assigning actions to these buttons. You can also have multiple buttons. For example, you can have one button to go to the left, one button to go to the right, one button to select. You can also have a forward button, for example, to go home. You can basically add as much switches as you want. So again, a demo on iOS. What happens when you turn it on? I'm using
switches. Tab. Access.
So it's going down automatically because I only have one switch, which is I'm using my screen. So this means I can navigate manually. So it's basically going down the screen one by one. And then when you press the screen, it acts as an action. And then you get other menus to perform more actions. So let's see if I...
Switch control switches. Full screen. One switch should be Bluetooth device. Switch control switches. Edit. But switch control switches. Full screen. One switch should be Bluetooth tab. Switch.
So now I tap on the screen, we can select an action to execute.
Switch tab. Switch. Access tab. Access. Settings. Accessibility vision. Head voiceover. Physical and mode touch. But face ID and the switch tab. Scroll down more. Exit menu tab. Scroll down more. Row 1. Row 2. Row 3. More. Exit menu. Row 1. Row 2. Settings. Search. Notification. General. Syrian search. Exit group. General. Control center. Display and bright access tab. Settings. Accessibility vision. Head voiceover. Physical and mode touch. But face ID and the switch tab. Scroll down more. Exit menu tab. Setting. Accessibility. Switch control. Switch tab. Important. Are you sure you want cancel? Yes. Tab.
So this was a demo of switch access. It's not really how most people use it. Most people use multiple switches, so they navigate the interface themselves. As you can see, sometimes it's kind of quick. You can't hear what they're saying. If you have 2 buttons, you can just manually navigate, but some users are only able to use 1 switch because of their disability. So they are using their devices in this way. So the conclusion of my talk is to try to make your apps as accessible as possible. If you do this, you probably also comply to the European Accessibility Act. And I'm sharing my own knowledge on a Dutch platform. It's called apt.nl. So it stands for, in Dutch, accessibility is named toegankelijkheid. So it's the T from that and then added to app. So if you're Dutch, you can read content on there. Maybe I will make it available in English in the future. Yeah, and then a summary. European Accessibility Act is a set of common accessibility requirements. To make your app accessible, use POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. And some impairments you can expect users to have. It's visual, hearing, mobility, and learning issues. And if you use those techniques I showed, so it's screen readers, voice access, and also switch control, you can make an interface accessible for users with one of those impairments. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Jan. I appreciate the demo, the effort you put in. And we'll quickly go to your questions because we actually have many questions. I think the first one is Aicha. And she's asking, is there a penalty for non-compliant websites and apps regarding these accessibility that you presented?
Yeah, I'm actually still going through all the legal content because it's over 100 pages. It's hard to read, but as far as I understand, right now there's no penalty yet. It's kind of like the GDPR. There's supposed to be a penalty. Maybe some big companies will get a penalty, but especially smaller companies and also I guess medium-sized companies, I don't expect anyone to get a penalty at this point in time, but maybe in the future, after a couple of years, maybe there might be penalties. I think it's up to all the countries to decide. So because the law is European, but then each country, for example, Netherlands, they have their own sort of variation on the European Accessibility Act. They can be more strict or equally as strict. So I guess it depends on the country and the future.
And kind of related to that question, we have seen asking, are there any directives to be enforced for private sector's websites and apps?
Yeah, so this is interesting. It's actually not in the European Accessibility Act, but there is a different act from the United Nations, I believe. And I was actually surprised to read that for example, discrimination if people with a wheelchair can't access your building, and apparently apps also fall under those kind of regulations. So apparently there are some kind of directives to be enforced for private sector websites and apps, but I don't think, again, there are any penalties. I guess it's yeah. So I guess the regulation is there, but nobody's really checking it.
So if I can add to that, so it's a bit different than GDPR in that case, right? Because GDPR applies to basically all the services that are available in the EU, not just by public sector. So this is mainly targeted towards like public sector services.
Yes, yeah. So this specific act is mainly about the public sector. So basically, that any citizen can use the services of the government properly. So any digital things like websites and apps. For example, in Netherlands, we have a lot of apps for garbage. So each city has a different garbage app. It's like a white label app. So those kind of apps need to be accessible in the future. But for the private sector, I believe there's different regulation, but I don't think anything is kind of being enforced with penalties at this point.
Okay, thank you. And I will kind of combine Guillermo and Jayao's question, because they ask, if you are an individual, for example, designer or developer, is there a guideline of patterns to follow to make the apps more accessible? Are there toolboxes to use in early design and late evaluation phase to check apps accessibility compliance?
Yeah, there are some guidelines actually by Apple for iOS. Basically, the guidelines from Apple are really clear, and also they have really a lot of developer tools, mainly for actually developers, so programmers in that sense, not so much for interface design, but they do have also some content on designing good interfaces. So if you want to check them out, you can go to Apple. Search for like iOS accessibility. I believe you will get the correct websites, and also Android accessibility. But what I'm trying to do on my own website, the app website, is sort of put it all in one place, because the problem is that Apple and Google, they have the content out there somewhere. It's like really hard to find everything. So you have to really spend hundreds of hours to go through everything and actually find what they made. So yeah, the content is out there somewhere, but it's hard to find basically.
And I think I would ask the last question, because there's nothing else. I'm kind of thinking more about the future. So the prominence of AI in using it in apps, because now it's some rudimentary thing like text to voice, but I guess there's going to be a problem in the future because AI is not regulated, and you yourself said that these accessibility things are not, there are some regulations, but they are not really thinking that much about having it on all the platforms. Are there any like worries you have as a designer and as a creator of these apps in the future?
So about accessibility and AI?
Yeah, the combination of the two, like there seems to be not so much regulated in that area.
Yeah, I don't know about what they try to do, but I can imagine that AI might replace, for example, like chatbots. It might be harder for some users to interact with these chatbots because they are only available by keyboards, so to type. But if you're not able to use your hands to type, then maybe you need to use voice to text. But for example, I believe most chatbots, chatting, they don't support voice. So in that way, they're not accessible. And then maybe AI will replace certain abilities to call companies. Instead, they will have like a knowledge base where you can find your answer, or like a chatbot you can talk to. So yeah, maybe we'll have some issues with accessibility.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We don't have any more questions.
I think I saw one from, I still hear one. Will platform owners play any role in checking the compliance? I guess it's already combined, right?
Oh yeah, there's a, yeah.
But I know for a fact that Apple already has stricter guidelines than Google for apps. And also a big benefit of Apple and their whole system, like Xcode, it's already a lot more accessible. So if you build a native app with Objective-C or Swift, basically, if you use the standard components, it will already be almost completely accessible. And then if you compare that to Android, if you use the standard components, it will not really be accessible at all. So yeah, there's still a really big difference between Android and iOS. And I think the biggest problem is that on Android, you have different manufacturers. For example, Samsung, because they're so big, they think they know better. So for example, they use different accessibility features. So for developers, it's really annoying because you try to make your app accessible. You think it's accessible, and then you try it on a Samsung device, and it has different behavior. And on Apple, you just try it on an iPod, and you know it's going to exactly behave the same on an iPad or an iPhone or any kind of device, and it will behave the same on every iOS version. And on Android, a lot of accessibility features were added in the latest version. For example, Android 9 and 10 were more focused on accessibility, but most users don't have that version. So yeah, in that sense, you can really see that Apple is really far ahead with accessibility, and also it shows in the numbers because most people with a disability, especially visually impaired people, they almost always pick iPhones.
Okay, thank you. I guess sorry, Jose, I missed your question, but I think that's everything. And I want to thank both of our speakers, Guillermo and Jan, for joining us today and joining everybody here to listen to these amazing presentations. And before we stop recording, I just want to say that next week we have, of course, another Tuesday Afterworks, but this time with the twist. We will not have any speakers, we will play games. And feel free to fill in the forums on the website because we will be asking if there's some specific game you would like us to play. So please check it out. And now I think the recording can be stopped. Jose Carlos, please.